Have you ever wondered what a pastor does on his or her day off? I do a lot of strange things on mine. This past Monday, I spent 4 hours reading through the entire deposition of Marie Yovanovitch, the former U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine. During my reading, one phrase stood out to me: revolution of dignity. Revolution of dignity. It began in the Ukraine in 2014 with the ouster of its corrupt president and the swearing in of a new president, Petro Poroshenko. The revolution's ultimate goal was to rid Ukraine of corruption and lawlessness and to reform the political system of graft and criminal activity. They could have called it many things, but they chose to name it the Revolution of Dignity. Now, you don't hear that word dignity very often anymore. Webster's provides this definition: the state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. The state or quality of being worthy of honor or respect. Now, I'm not going to get into Ukrainian politics this morning. God knows you've probably heard enough about it throughout the week. But I am going to talk with you today about dignity. And if there ever was a revolution of dignity in history, it happened in the person of Jesus Christ. When Jesus entered the first century fray, it was in the midst of tax collectors who skimmed off the top, gung-ho soldiers who saw violence as an acceptable means to an end, and corrupt religious leaders whose objective it was to be seen and venerated and blindly followed. Jesus was different. Yes, he was a revolutionary, but his was not a revolution of service to himself. His was a revolution of dignity, an entire lifestyle dedicated to conducting oneself and one's relationships with honor and respect. The very last line of our reading for this morning begins, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve." By the way, the phrase Son of Man is just a fancy biblical way of saying Jesus, the human one. For even Jesus, the human one, did not come from heaven to be served, but to serve. And how would Jesus serve? With honor and respect. Take our gospel reading today. Jesus has just finished predicting his treatment at the hands of his enemies. They would condemn him, mock him, spit upon him, and kill him. When James and John, two of his followers, amble up and blithely say to him, "Hey, when you're dead and have entered into your glory, can one of us sit on your right hand and one of us sit on your left hand?" Leave it to Jesus' disciples to be callous and clueless. But rather than berate them for being insensitive and arrogant, Jesus instead decides to turn this into a teaching moment. A revolution of dignity, we might say. Like a good psychologist or therapist, Jesus answers their question with a question of his own. "Are you able," he asks, "to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" You see, Jesus was referring to his death. Are you able, James and John, to die with dignity upon a cross? One of the most ignominious and humiliating forms of death imaginable? Is that the kind of baptism you wish for yourselves? And if so, are you able to undergo it with aplomb and honor and respect for yourselves? Can you do it? And with arrogance and hubris, James and John reply, "Yep, we can do it. We're good." Can you see Jesus shaking his head? Can you understand why we're told that the other disciples began to be angry with James and John? But again, rather than getting perturbed or sarcastic or short-tempered with James and John, Jesus decides to turn this into a teaching moment for all of his disciples. We read that Jesus calls them to himself and says to them, "You know that the world's great leaders are tyrants, that those dictators lord it over their subjects, don't you? Well, that may be the model you've seen, but it is not to be the model among you." See, Jesus is beginning his revolution of dignity here. You may have seen, you may have heard, you may have witnessed disciples, but it is not to be so among you. You are to be different. You are to be set apart. You are to conduct yourselves with honor and respect for yourselves and others. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. Now, I'm glad that Jesus used the words servant and slave here, because 150 years this side of the Civil War, we Americans may have forgotten the nature of servitude as it applied to human beings back then, and as it certainly applied to servitude and slavery in Jesus' time. To be told to be a servant to others, to be commanded by Jesus to be a slave to others, was surely deeply offensive to Jesus' disciples. They knew the status of servants and slaves. They saw the indignity, the disrespect with which slaves and servants were treated. And Jesus wanted them to willingly take on those humiliating roles. Was he crazy? Why, even Jesus wouldn't. Whoa, wait a minute. Yes, Jesus did. Jesus would wash their feet as a servant would wash someone's feet. Jesus would serve them food as a slave might serve others food. Jesus would say, "This is my body, this is my blood broken for you, shed for you." Jesus wasn't asking them to do anything he hadn't already done for them. Regularly, consistently, constantly. If they wanted to be great, if they wanted to be influential, then they had to make themselves small. They had to make themselves humble. They had to put themselves last if they ever hoped to be first in God's grace, first in service, first in compassion shown, first in love exemplified. Exemplified. For even the Son of Man, even Jesus, the human one, who exemplified for us what it means to be truly human, even he did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. That's another word we don't hear too often anymore, unless it's in relation to a kidnapping. Ransom. Here's Wikipedia's definition. Ransom: a sum of money or other payment demanded or paid for the release of a prisoner. Who are the prisoners in our story today, if not the disciples? Bound by their antiquated views of servanthood and who should do it, locked into their prejudices and their narrow worldview based on their limited experiences and their stereotypical responses to Jesus' mind-bending questions and earth-shattering statements. Jesus is giving his life so that they might be released from their prison of narrowness and arrogance. But they are not the only ones. Jesus, the human one, the Son of Man, came to give his life a ransom for many, not just for a few. That means for more than just 12 people. That means for more than just those who realize that they're chained or bound. It means for all of us who are imprisoned by our fears or our perfectionism or our judgmentalism or our lack of self-esteem or self-regard. Jesus gave his life, and I don't just mean his death on the cross. I mean his teaching, his example, his time, his energy. He gave his life, his imagination, his entire being as a sacrifice so that we might be freed from the things that have bound us. He is our ransom, yours and mine today. And that ransom does not lead to lording it over others. It does not lead to placing ourselves above them. Rather, it leads to a revolution of dignity, honoring those whom we serve, respecting those with whom we work and play and live, humbly regarding those with whom we come into contact every day, in the grocery store, at the bank, on the street, every person. On this Veterans Day weekend, we not only honor those who have served our country, we honor all who with humility and dignity have served Jesus, the human one, sacrificing their self-interest for the release of others from chains that bind them, from the prisons that surround them, from the bars that limit them. We honor all of those who give their lives in that way every single day. If you or I somehow believe that it is not our job to be their servant, to act as a slave to all of them out there around us, then remember, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, starting a revolution of dignity. Are you in the fight, Christian? Am I? Amen.